You're watching ProPix Canada Media. I'm James Kuzno in Vancouver, British Columbia. Recently, you've seen a lot of social media posts by Canadian music superstar Bryan Adams. He doesn't usually take part in a lot of political or other issues online. He is a supporter of many great charitable and social issues around the world, but he doesn't usually get online about a lot of these things. Lately, though, he has been speaking out about the Canadian content regulations and the changes that are happening within that field. Now, for people outside of Canada that aren't familiar with what they call Canadian content or CanCon, it is a regulation within Canada that states that music within a certain area of writing and composition is needed to be a certain percent done by a Canadian artist in order to qualify as Canadian content. So when you look at artists such as Bryan Adams, who have co-writers and composers around the world, it takes a lot of his music and makes it non-eligible for the CanCon regulations. Now, he is one of the greatest musicians to ever come out of the country and to represent Canada on a global stage. So for his music, any of it to be declared as non-Canadian content is just ridiculous. So what he is bringing attention to now is the definition of what qualifies for Canadian content, and he wants that to be something that is spoken and consulted from government to musicians such as himself and others from across the country. It's a matter of making sure that there's a fair playing field, but this is going back many decades. And with today's technology and the internet, it's less important in terms of the regulations. This was originally to ensure that Canadian content got exposure on the radio, got airplay, and was recognized and introduced to Canada as a part of our culture. Now, with the technology and the internet these days, it's becoming less important for these protection mechanisms to be in place, but it is there, again, to protect and promote Canadian content. Just a matter of the definition as to what qualifies is the question. And that's where Justin Trudeau and other people in government and regulation, the regulators, need to consult with the musicians and come up with a fair calculation as to what qualifies and what doesn't. If you are a Canadian artist, you've got to realize that you may at some point hit a level where you're writing with US artists or writers. You may go down to Nashville, you may go to LA, you may go to New York, and so forth, to create your music and co-write. And that's where you may run into issues with the Canadian content regulations when it comes to qualifying as a Canadian artist. This also impacts grants and other Arts Canada Council programs that you may or may not qualify for. These things can be important for artists, as we know that there are a very small number of musicians that make it large in the industry, that get record contracts and so forth. So it is an important issue that needs to be addressed. I've personally written and produced music. Fortunately, I was co-writing and working with Canadian artists, so the CanCon regulations were not an issue for me. But I have recorded, including at Bryan Adams' warehouse studios in Vancouver, so I understand the complexities and the importance of this issue. If you're out there and want to support this initiative to redress what qualifies as Canadian content and to encourage the regulation creators and the regulators themselves to work with the artists, not in spite of them, then I encourage you to email your local politicians at both provincial and federal levels to put pressure on them to come to the table with musicians, producers, and the industry to make sure that it is fair and equitable for everyone, but to make sure that it is inclusive of the artists themselves to decide what is and what is not considered Canadian content in that regard. Thank you for watching. Once again, this is James Cousineau with ProPix Canada Media in Vancouver, British Columbia. Take care. Stay safe, everyone.